Hello, everyone. So welcome to our webinar, where we're going to discuss around making AI work in discovery chemistry. So I'm your host for today. I'm Nathan Brown. I'm the Director of Science here at Tibrium. And before we get going, I've just got a few housekeeping things just to mention for those online. So we're recording today's session, and we'll make it available on demand afterwards on our website. So if you need to drop off at any point, you'll be able to catch up separately from our website. In terms of Q&A, we're going to use the function in Zoom webinar. So please feel free to ask questions during the meeting using the Q&A button. We'll answer those if it makes sense during, but we also set aside 50 minutes at the end of the panel discussion to go through those questions. So we'll try and answer as many as possible today. And as I said already, the webinar is being recorded, so you can access on our website, optibrium.com. Yep, as I said already, I'm Nathan Brown. I'm the Director of Science at Optibrium. I joined in January, but before now I'm working at Helix and Benevolent AI, so a couple of AI tech bio companies in the UK. And long before that, I was at the Institute of Cancer Research for 10 years, leading the computational chemistry team. I'll hand over now. We've got a really lovely panel of speakers, and thank you guys all for your time. I'll say thank you now before we run out of time later. So rather than me read out everyone's credentials, I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. So if we just go through in turn, Charlotte, would you like to go first? I'll bring up the slide. This is Charlotte Dean.
So, hello, I'm Charlotte. So I'm a professor in the University of Oxford, and I lead the Oxford Protein Informatics group, where we work using and developing AI computational methods for drug discovery across immunoinformatics and small molecules, particularly focusing on databases and things like that. And just for a couple of context points, I'm part of the team that's leading OpenBind, which is an £8 million, that's the initial investment from government, to try and build the world's largest open database of, I'm actually going to say, sort of small molecule protein interactions. And because I have to say this, whatever I'm doing now, for full disclosure, I'm also currently executive chair of the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in the UK. And in that role, I look after the AI program for all of UK research and innovation.
Sorry, technical issues. Thanks so much, Charlotte, for that. Pat, hand over to you for introduction, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Pat Walters. I lead OpenAdmit, which is an open science effort with the objective of improving our ability to build machine learning models to predict things like drug metabolism and toxicity. Prior to this role, I spent about 30 years working in drug discovery at Relay Therapeutics and Vertex Pharmaceuticals.
Thanks so much, Pat. Hand over to Chris now.
Hi, my name's Chris Swain. I'm a drug discovery consultant. I spent 20 years at Merck, leading a number of programs, and then 2006, I set up my own company for drug discovery. I also chair of the Royal Society of Chemistry's Chemical Information and Computer Applications Group, and currently chair of the organising committee for the AI and chemistry meeting.
Thanks, Chris. And last but not least, Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Paul Jodorowsky, currently a professor for officially it's physical chemistry, but it's not all about physical chemistry, but also developing and challenging machine learning models for all sorts of biologically related properties. In this role, I also established a cell painting essay here in Mainz. Yeah, and before becoming a professor, actually, I also spent more than a decade in the pharmaceutical industry, so the dark side of the force, yeah, but just to learn what industry needs or what is lacking. So I worked for the other Merck, Chris, yeah, for Merck KGaA at Darmstadt, and also for Boehringer Ingelheim. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks very much, Paul. And thanks to all of you again. Thanks for giving us your time today. And it's great, I think, just reflecting as people, I knew it, but until you hear it directly from the people, it's great to have this range of perspectives in the room, and getting the four of you together for this I'm just very pleased that you could make time and find time for us. I think because of that, with all the kinds of interests and backgrounds you'll have, I think we're going to have a really exciting conversation. So I'll stop sharing. Sorry, this is why I shouldn't host things. I'm not very good with computers. There are weird slides. Sorry. Now I'll stop sharing, and now I'll start talking. So I think before we get started, I'd just like to set the scene about what we're thinking about today. So as you know, we're looking at AI in drug discovery. And what we want to look at how we make AI work in discovery chemistry. For sure, AI has existed for decades, and we've been applying it in drug discovery for a number of decades too. But we're really seeing a sea change in the way we apply and adapt AI to drug discovery, small molecule, protein structures, all of the above, the ADMET data. And the discovery teams are generating more and more data, and we're working across many more modalities. And we're also being asked to move faster, do more with less, is the age-old mantra. So AI clearly has the potential to help with this, but the day-to-day reality for most early-stage teams is often quite different from the success stories we hear about in certain media outlets. So the question is no longer simply whether teams should adopt AI, but how we can use it effectively, responsibly, and sustainably. And we can touch on some of these aspects during the conversation today. So what does it take for chemists and researchers to trust these tools and use them with confidence? How do we know when they are genuinely improving decisions rather than simply producing impressive outputs? And as the technology continues to evolve, and it is evolving at quite a pace at the moment, I have to say, what should discovery leaders be paying attention to? So these are the kinds of questions we have to discuss today. So really, I'd like to start with thinking around what it means to define AI strategy and value. So what should organizations, starting with an AI strategy, what does a good one look like in practice, and what problems are genuinely worth solving? So who would like to open up some comments on this? So I can give a quick anecdote from work I've done in the past. I've been working in AI since the 90s, and I've come from a computer science background, and I think one of the aspects, and it's not just AI in this case, is it's very difficult to gain trust in computational methods, and very easy to lose that trust once you've gained it. So it's understanding how we can build that into explainability as well as not just giving predictions, but understanding why this prediction is, how it can be influencing decision making, not just using things like vanity metrics of R-squareds, etc. These are all very valuable metrics, but we can get a little bit beholden to chasing the R-squared. It's really adding that true value, the actual benefit of the computational models. Who would like to join in on this?
I'll
Maybe
back you up with that one, Nathan, that I think there's lots of parts around a good AI strategy. The bad AI strategy is the ones where people say, I want AI to touch every aspect of what we do, or other useful sentences of that type, which I have heard many times. It's actually about the defining where it brings value and where it actually helps. But then I think the bigger part of it, and it isn't specific to our field, but I think it is in our field embedded quite a lot, that there is a sort of natural skepticism because, of course, like any computational technique, and in fact, a lot of experimental techniques, it isn't 100% perfect. So if the one thing they try it on fails, it then becomes, this is useless, which is very difficult to then propagate it through the system and get people to pick it up and run with it. So for me, a good AI strategy is both about identifying the areas which will really make a difference. So it actually helps if you bother to use it here. But then the other part of that is doing it in such a way that the people who are being asked to use it understand what they are using and why and how it will help them. Because there is an awful lot of, it's almost like immune system rejection to it at the moment. So you either have people picking up and running with it and saying it's like God's gift, it's magic, it can solve everything. Or you have people going, clearly I've looked at it and it does rubbish, and neither of those is correct. It is just a very, very useful tool in the hands of the right people used for the right problems and setups. So a strategy is both about understanding where it has value as computation, but an awful lot more of it is actually about people who are going to have to use it and how you make it usable and how it runs with them and how they can work with it for all of those things. And then I think the last part I'd say is a good AI strategy is actually a lot of it is around data as well. If you don't have the right data, the right training, the right models, then none of the rest of this matters. It doesn't help you.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I mean, I'd underline what Charlotte said, actually. I think the first step is you've got to understand your own process, your drug discovery process, and then think about what are the rate determining steps and how AI might impact those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, Nathan, I can echo what you said earlier. This is all about decisions. I mean, if you think about it, for those of us in the computational field, we only have two jobs. We need to convince someone to do an experiment or convince someone not to do an experiment. And you really need to have tools. And if we're talking about AI, you need to have something that's supporting those decisions. And back to what Charlotte was saying, really making people confident in those decisions. And I think the only way to do that is really through doing benchmarking, evaluating things carefully, and making sure that the tooling that you're deploying is supporting those decisions.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all of that. Paul, do you want to comment before we?
Yeah, well, just maybe echoing, but also maybe to my 2 cents. And I don't know how you do it, Charlotte, at your university. For me, it's also like an education effort, yeah, that everyone is talking about AI, especially the young fellows, yeah, and how to teach them how not to use AI or what AI can do or cannot do. And in my computational chemistry class, I always start with statistics because it's lots of boring statistics, but that's what it's all about, yeah. And if you don't the data or not the right data, then you cannot assume that you get any sort of useful prediction, yeah. And I mean, when we were doing QSA, we are all not that young anymore. Yeah, when we did QSA, no one cared about it. But now with all these LLMs around, people are looking at it, and I think it's our joint effort to navigate everyone. Yeah, like in industry or in academia or in both. Yeah, or community. Yeah, how to meet expectations or not to meet expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a meeting with someone in my team earlier today, and we were talking just about data and how much of your time it takes just to get the data in your data house in order before you even start modeling. Doing lots of data introspection, massaging those data in a very valid way, and estimating modelability, let's say, and looking at the potential to get something useful out of that. Charlotte, I see.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing into this. I mean, I think it's implicit in what we've all said, but I think sometimes it's worth making explicit, which is also an AI strategy is not necessarily around having the most accurate model, which is what a lot of people start from. They start from, my model is 2% more accurate. That's not actually what matters if you're really trying to scale this out or make it work. What matters is the speed at which it improves your decision making. So it can be a less accurate model if it will allow you to run faster or will allow your process to be better. And we often conflate those two, because if you have a 100% accurate model, well, then it is the same thing. But there are real differences when you don't have that, about actually it can be less accurate, but if it's very quick at telling me it's wrong, or it will very quickly suggest the next set of experiments, it is much more powerful than something that is 3 or 4% more accurate, but doesn't tell me anything about what I should do experimentally next, because I know something, but it's not something I can use. So I think those kinds of things have to come into this. So the metrics are sometimes driving us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, Paul saying we're not so young anymore. I remember when the Huskinen solubility dataset was published in the early 2000s. Everyone was building the best model possible, and everyone was chasing that R squared on the test set. And then Tim Clark, I think it was in Erlangen, said at EuroQSAR that I've built the best model ever. It's so good, it's even better than the experimental values. And then he just said, can we all stop doing this now? And like looking for, as you said, Charlotte, the value added in the modeling. And I know, yeah, Pat, you're working with OpenAdMet. You see this with your data challenges, modeling challenges. Can you comment around that?
Yeah, I think ultimately, when we're building machine learning models, the key here is, as several people have said already, it's all about the data. And this is one of the things that we've been doing with OpenAdMet, is trying to generate high quality data sets and then using those high quality data sets to host blind challenges so that we can hopefully see where the current state of the art is, and then also help the community to raise our ability to build models.
Yeah, and I think that's hugely important as well, acknowledging that pre-competitive aspect of what we're doing. We are competing in some ways, but in the pre-competitive with open data, OpenAdMet, OpenBind, we're putting out into the community these tools and these data sets that allow us all to do better together, and then apply that to our own internal work. And I think it's hugely valuable. Any other comments from anyone? Paul, Chris?
I guess one of the comments I would make is that we keep talking about data, it's not just simply data, though. You have to understand what the data means. You need the domain knowledge to actually build a good model, I think.
Yeah, and understanding the assay that's being run, and the
Yeah.
constraint, the validity of the results coming out. In terms of embracing AI, I mean, Charlotte, you talked to the two extremes, the zealots who believe everything works because the computer told me so I don't need to think anymore, to the other extreme where it's like, oh, if I kick it, it falls over, and therefore it can never be useful. How do we encourage embracing the tools we're developing, encourage the using of the models as well, all around, not just like a QSAR, QSPR model, but think about large language models as well and how they influence chemistry and molecular design? Anyone have any ideas around that take-up?
I think others have already touched on it already, as have you. I think one of the biggest things here is the difference between an AI model and previous computational models is previously most of them had a statistical model that underpinned them. So you could give an estimate of accuracy. Yep. You genuinely could. And if you were out of the domain it had been trained on, it would start telling you it didn't know what it was doing. All right. And you could do that. And for most of those models as well, we could backwards go through them and explain why it gave the answer it did. And those are two characteristics which are not naturally built into any of the AI frameworks we might use. And there are lots of, AI is a massive topic. It's not one model we're talking about here. And I suspect that it is both of those things that are required to really help people deal with this. And that might not be explainability or statistical models in the way we've had them before, but ways where we can have an understanding of why it makes mistakes, or understand when it's likely to make mistakes, or what we can do about those mistakes. Because it's not actually to do with the accuracy of the model that people don't like. It's the fact they don't understand why and how and when. And because it makes mistakes that are very different from the types of mistakes that we're used to as well. I think that's the other part of the issue. So for me, a big part of this is going to be, and comes back to what Paul was saying, it's an education piece about understanding the limitations of these models. Starts from understanding your data, which Chris said, and then understanding the model itself statistically about what it can and can't do, and then testing it in a very rigorous fashion so you understand all those things, and being able to convey that to everyone so that they understand what they're playing with.
Yeah.
I think just to build on that, the other thing we really have to deal with now as our models are getting larger and larger is data leakage. You see all of these papers being published making these wonderful claims. And then when you look under the hood, these models are just, in many cases, just memorizing the data that they were given to train on, and then predicting on something that's either the same or very similar to what was in the training set. But I think as you get into training these huge large language models, it gets very difficult because often you don't even know what was in the training set. So I think we have to scrutinize this, and we have to try to find real prospective blinded sets that we can use to honestly evaluate the performance of the models. Because I see too much now where you look at this and you're like, is that real, or was there some data leakage somewhere?
Yeah. I know you've published recently on this. No, Chris, sorry, do you want to?
No, I was just agreeing with Pat. I think it is a problem. And I think if I look at it as a user, as it were, you have almost no chance of going into the depths of understanding like someone like Pat has done.
Yeah,
and it also gets very resource intensive when it comes to the lab work or the labor work. Yeah, so it's not, you don't need GPUs, you need wet lab devices, yeah, and technicians or students, yeah, or chemicals, yeah, and or electricity for this, yeah. And it is really very grateful what Pat is setting up, yeah, and also very desperate in setting something similar, but we are not that huge organization, yeah. And it's all about then also all the nifty gritty details like but everyone clear, yeah, but the research data management, yeah, where's the raw data, how to process this when you have when you don't have open source software but proprietary software, where's the documentation? So no data, no AI part. Yeah, that's I think one tweet I've seen 2 years ago, but I think it's still true. Yeah, and yeah, it's an ongoing effort, and I'm really grateful to these blind predictions. And we also run a few out of ourselves, but it's demanding, in terms of man and woman power.
Yeah, for sure. In my experience, we can computationally come up with millions of possible molecules we could make next just around one scaffold. But to realize those experimentally and synthesize and test them can take weeks, months even, depending on the size of the
Yes.
set. And really thinking about not just the n+1, but this kind of asynchronous batch problem where we never make one compound and then, or rarely make one compound and then decide what we do after that. We're making batches of compounds. How do we make that resilient to some of those compounds not coming back from the lab, some of them crashing out in the assay, building in this resilience, so active learning kind of aspects of this approach. Is there anything around there that makes us a bit different to other fields in discovery chemistry? So I think around precision, validation, certainty, trust. You alluded to it earlier, Charlotte.
It's difficult because I think normally when we ask this question, of course, the comparative field that everyone looks at is what happened in natural language. So large language models, let's be honest, they are quite incredible at creating language and at writing documents. They probably write better than, well, they definitely write better than me. I suspect they write on average better than most people write. Yep. But they also write garbage sometimes. But the differences, I think, in our field are things that we have relatively sparse data given the size of the space that we have to deal with. The space is enormous. There's lots of papers and stuff around that. So we have a huge space. We have very sparse data, and it's not very well distributed for machine learning. Yeah. So the very big importance of a lot of the initiatives is not about leaving it to chance what data will come, is about trying to say, if you collect data with machine learning, with AI in mind, what data would you collect? And you still can't do it right, but you get a bigger chance. And then I think the last part of that is actually that experimental feedback. Experimental feedback for many of the properties we care about is relatively slow and also is not consistent or accurate. So if I think about something like binding affinity, if you get lots of different labs to measure binding affinity, you get lots of different numbers. Now that is an inherently uncertain number then, but we haven't yet built that into the way that we think about predicting binding affinity with a computer. It's not inbuilt into that. But we also don't get all the data points back. So we have noisy data. It's imprecise in some sense. We don't get all the data back we wanted. So even if we thought that would be the most valuable data point to make the model better, but perhaps the most important one is it's slow. Yeah. It takes a long time for most of the problems we care about to get the data that would help improve the model back into the feedback loop. And that makes it really hard to work out how you improve the model, because the model is changing during that period of time as well. The algorithm's changing, the background's changing, everything else is changing. By the time you have some new data to feed in, everything else has moved as well. And so I think that makes it tricky for us to truly understand the effects of different things that we're doing here. And the data size, when you have slow generation of data, is going to be a problem for the field, I think, for quite a long time.
I think what's also different, and I'm not a linguist at all. I never tried to be one. But I think we understand language, or we know what sounds good or bad, or maybe even better. In chemistry, I think we are still not fully, and I don't know how long it will take to understand it, because it all goes back to natural laws. So that, an electron is an electron. It has properties. There is Coulomb, all these things. These are laws. And models try to model this, but then there are always new findings, new experimental setups, or new protein structures pop up, or new experimental technique like cryo-EM, or I don't know what is in 2 years, and then we learn a little more, and with these models that they can help us, but I think it goes back what Charlotte said. We are still too slow in our experimental feedback, and maybe there are properties that are where throughput is better, but in general, we are way too slow for this fast pace. And I think we just need to be aware of this, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, so the design, make, test, analyze cycles are still bottlenecked around the making and testing. where it can easily take months for that data
Yeah,
to come back.
and even I think also along these lines, gives two molecules to two chemistry labs. Maybe one will fail in synthesizing the molecule, the other one will not. And what is true? So that's a shout maybe for a shout out for another blind prediction. And there are these challenges, for synthesis of molecules or for validating experimental methods with themselves. And it's fascinating, but it's not high throughput.
But I think one of the keys to getting all of this moving is just having efforts like OpenBind and efforts like OpenAdmit that are generating large data sets, putting them out there, and then letting the community figure out what to do with these. I mean, if you compare what we're doing with most other fields in machine learning, Charlotte's right, we have a paucity of data, but I think through these efforts that we have generating experimental data, we can use those to move the field forward, because before this, we just didn't have the data sets. We would have these data sets that were curated out of 150 different papers where people were doing the experiments in different ways. I think at least we've taken that first step to getting relatively large, consistently generated data sets. So let's see what we can do with those, because I think we aren't even taking advantage of what we have yet.
And I guess it does go back to the inherent biases in our data sets. So, I mean, bias is a big problem for AI anyway, but our data sets like Campbell is very biased because of where the data comes from. It's a small data set, 40, 50 compounds that tell the story that you want to tell as part of a JMed Chem to get that published. Those inherent biases are real. And then as you say, you're collating these biases from 150 different papers. So those biases cascade in different ways. So you've got islands of data within this large space that then goes to the data structure challenge. But I will say I'm not naysaying on Campbell. I'm not naysaying on the RD kit as well. I always say they're two of the best resources that I didn't have when I was doing my PhD. But just a quick shout out to the guys at Campbell and Greg at RDKit and the others. But that super enabled scientists worldwide to be able to do my PhD in an afternoon. And we're seeing a similar kind of rate change in what we're doing now with LLMs, regardless of whether they're regardless of all the challenges and limitations. We're trying to understand. I remember David Bowie once saying in the 90s that we're trying to understand the internet. It's like this alien come from another planet and we're trying to understand how to talk to it. I feel the same way with LLMs now. The LLM's great. It's just I don't know how to talk to it to get sensible answers out. So every day I was building models. I said to you the other week, Pat, for the PXR data set in an LLM with real code, not building it off the data set directly. But yeah, there's just seeing the way things are changing so quickly. And in terms of going beyond predictions, but what do we think around, we've talked a little bit about prioritization, decision making, but also generative AI, generative chemistry. So what we used to call de novo design. How do people feel about that, helping with that?
I think the idea of using it to generate ideas is very helpful. Somebody still has to make the selection about which compounds you're going to make. But I think it's good in that we perhaps suggest ideas that you perhaps wouldn't have thought of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I talk about data and AI being biased, but I think the most biased are humans. We have a lot of cognitive biases that really stymie our efforts at objectivity. I remember when I joined the ICI, I worked on the ORA FLT3 kinase inhibitor. So FLT3 was a dual inhibitor. I just took the data set. I did a very simple R group decomposition, built up, assuming all those things could be made, it built up a library of 2,500 things. And we rediscovered a substituent that had been forgotten about because it had problems in an MLM assay. But we moved on to an HLM assay and it wasn't a problem that. So we rediscovered what we already knew, but using not AI in this case. Well, I was doing some AI with some random forest models, so I guess that's AI. But it just shows
simply free Wilson, right? Or what did you do for this? Because this is, I think Pat also wrote a very nice blog post on this years ago, and it's in a very old method, but still definitely valuable. Yeah, so completely AI free. Yeah,
AI in chemistry goes I won't bore the audience with this, but it goes back to the early 19th century and the dawn of atomistic theory. Alexander Crum Brown, James Joseph Sylvester, Cayley, Kekulé, all these guys. We were thinking about this a couple of centuries ago, but we didn't have computers to help. So Cayley was enumerating kilograms and all this kind of stuff. And I'll start with the history and I'll carry on to the present. Anything else around generative chemistry that helps us?
I think the one thing we still have to come to grips with is how to come up with the appropriate objective functions for our generative models and how to assess them, because they do things that are interesting, but they also do things that are really silly. And trying to pick out those silly things is a non-trivial problem. So again, this kind of comes back to Charlotte's point, where if you go and show a bunch of really silly molecules to a team of chemists, they're just going to say this is nonsense. So how do we get to the point where we can incorporate the intuition that's baked into medicinal chemists from years and years of experience into something algorithmic that we can use to select the most appropriate molecules?
I've had a long history of chemists swearing at me when my de novo design algorithm coming up with really weird molecules, very explosive molecules. But yeah, to your point around scoring functions, I've got a long history of working in genetic algorithms, and they will do exactly what you tell them to, and they will do it very, very well. But they will find your loopholes in the scoring functions very quickly. They're very talented at doing that kind of work. So it's yeah, I agree with you. It's putting in those checks and balances, and I guess it goes back to the uncertainty as well. My first de novo design algorithm, I was getting crazy molecules out just on the predictions, but then I started building in different measures of uncertainty and out of domain predictions as part of the scoring function. But there's many other approaches nowadays. What else people's practical experiences of using these kinds of approaches in?
Yeah, one of the things I always want to say about this is, and it is quite funny because in all domains where you use AI, there seems to be sort of true. They make two types of mistakes. And it's really funny, the one that actually offends people. The one that people get cross about is, like you say, the crazy molecules they make. In our field, they do something that's really dumb, or they create something that smashes through the protein, or they make something that's, you'd never make that. And I always think that one's not actually, I mean, it is a problem. It's a problem because the humans don't like it, but it's not actually a problem because it takes me 0 seconds to go, not that one then. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite easy to write functions that rule those out. We know these basic rules. We've known them forever, the sort of basic rules of physics. Now, it might not be ideal, but you can do this. But for some reason, that's the mistakes that offend people and say they don't want to use AI. Or I'm like, I wouldn't worry about those because it works in a really different way to the way your brain works. It's a totally different setup. So it's making mistakes you can see. So that's good in a sense. What's much more worrying is when it does something that looks totally sensible that is actually also complete garbage. And that's where we should worry about it. So I think it's quite interesting because we focus a lot on that, the kind of obvious mistake part of it. I do too. I want to rule those out. But in some sense, they're simple to rule out. And we should just either get rid of them or people shouldn't be cross about them because they could just go, no, 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 no. Oh, that one is useful. But somehow that's not how we treat them. We treat them like they should never do that kind of thing. But they do that because they also do unexpected things. Like you say, their biases are different from the human ones. So they give us different options and different ways to play. So I'm always quite interested in that I would be worrying about the other part of this where we don't understand how wrong they are when they look convincing.
I remember a pharma company that will remain nameless. The chemists got very upset at the screening library, so they redesigned it, applying all of the filters that chemists never wanted to see this, never wanted to see that. And then when they ran the first screen, the chemist said, "Why are the molecules so boring? You got what you asked for. This is what you asked for." So it's interesting, and I quite like collecting weird molecules. There's some crazy molecules out there if you look in the literature that wouldn't pass. So there are, again, there can be some introduction of bias, thinking of things like Payne's filters, etc. But these are initial ways of getting rid of some stuff, or at least, maybe not filtering them out, but flagging them as things to look out for, things to just double check. Yeah. I love outliers. The outliers tell me so much more than the straight line. So I always go to the outliers first and figure out what's going on there. Why is that doing that? Why is this trend like 2 log units underpredicted always, and it's got its own little subset straight line? Chris, did you want to?
No, I would just agree with you. I think there are so many different varieties of targets in biology that actually you're going to need quite a variety of chemistry to address them all. So keeping in some variety is really very helpful.
So maybe we've got a few more minutes left. Maybe we can, this is going to be a challenging one, moving to the future and thinking about what's coming. Because I was reflecting with one of my colleagues last week that I thought I could predict the next 5 years fairly accurately, but I realized now I can't even predict the next 5 months because everything's moving so quick. But having said that, as a caveat, where do people think we're going in the next 3 to 5 years or so in the field of AI and drug discovery?
I'm kind of hoping that the efforts from people like Pat for accumulating data, high value data sets will become more mainstream and people will think about this should be an objective for everybody.
Yeah.
Shall I hear a really boring one? But it's my actual hope that we stop talking about AI. And what I mean by that is that it's a computational method that is part of the workflows that we are building. We are creating data for it and we are using it sensibly so that it stops being this kind of add-on thing we do from the side, but is integrated in the way we think about building a workflow right from the beginning. Yeah, it just is normal in that sense. And that doesn't mean it stopped improving. It doesn't mean that because I think there's a lot more to go than 3 or 5 years of being able to use this for everything. But I want us to move the conversation on to just how it's physically embedded in what we do, how it changes the processes of what we do. Maybe that's just because I have to talk about it so much in so many places. But I do actually think it's sort of almost that it needs to become more normal in the way we think about this so that we start acting in using it sensibly, because everyone is using it and everyone just goes, well, you can do it like this, you can't do that. This is what we need to build.
What I can imagine, I'm not sure if years are enough, but there's, I don't know if everyone heard this, there's this Nobel Turing Challenge, so that until 2050, any AI or any computer will discover something on the level of a Nobel laureate. And I'm not sure if 2050 is far too late, and maybe within the next 3 to 5 years, there will be some discovery, and maybe not only chemistry, but also biology or physics, where these LLMs discover something, a natural law that no one has so far thought of. Not talking about synthesizing a particular molecule, but really a breakthrough invention. Because I'm co-organizing a conference this October on discovery science, and that's not only about chemistry, but all sorts of physical sciences, so to say. And I'm a bit scared, I have to say, about this, but I'm interested in learning about this as well.
I think one of the things I'm most excited about is being able to integrate information from the literature with our models. So we have 50 years of medicinal chemistry literature out there, and none of us have read all of that. And there's all sorts of insights out there from clever people who did clever things. And 6 months ago, even, I didn't think that this was possible, but I'm seeing more and more now from large language models like GPT 5.5 and Claude Sonnet 4.7. I'm asking the medicinal chemistry questions, and I'm starting to get reasonable answers. So I think if we can get to the point where large language models can start to digest the information from the literature, understand strategies, and then be able to integrate this with models and have better data to build these models, I think we can start to put these pieces together and perhaps come up to something that's truly useful to teams on drug discovery programs.
I'm certainly finding I'm coding more than I ever have for many years, thanks to Claude. It's doing a lot of the dog work for me, but it's super enabling for me I've got this backlog of, like, as an old academic, I've got lots of project ideas that I used to keep in my top drawer for when random bits of PhD funding came out of the woodwork. And now I can test these myself. I did it in our science team meeting here last week. I built an SAR summary plot in half an hour during the meeting. I was using a lot of tokens on my Claude, so it got locked out for a bit. But it did exactly what I've dreamt about for like 10 years, but I just never had the time to do it. And now I wonder if we're coming to a point where doing is actually so easy that we've always said, or I've always said that I've not got I've got lots of ideas of what to do, but I haven't got enough time to try them. Now I'm feeling like I do have the time to try them, and maybe it will help. AI will help us inspire new ideas. So going to along Paul's line, so that they will start telling us things that we should be thinking about. And I'm certainly, yeah, seeing more and more of that in the AI LLMs I'm using at the moment. A little bit patronizingly, it's getting towards like the paperclip in Microsoft Office, where it's like, oh, it looks like you're trying to do this. Is there anything else I can help? So I'm hoping we're not going to that route. Any other comments about the future? How do we get the less technically savvy to integrate this into their workflow? Because I for a long time I've been passionate about these are my precious tools. You're not allowed to use them, medicinal chemist. It took me a long time to release that into democratizing tools out to the field. Talking about hypothesis generation around molecules, chemists I've worked with, they have an idea. I try and find some time to do it. A week or two later, I come back with them with the results of my docking run or pharmacal search, whatever. And then they look at the results and say, oh, yeah, the answer's good, but now I realize my question was wrong. I feel democratizing the tooling will allow people to close that loop on the hypothesis generation, the hypothesis validation, and give us computational scientists more time to really do a deep dive when the hypothesis has been refined. So I'm finding that's a dynamic that's changing in my sense. So now I love giving tools out to people with appropriate guardrails to ensure that they have this predict first attitude. But no,
I think we're going beyond that now. So I'm seeing all sorts of people working at the bench who don't have computational backgrounds, who are now building really cool visualization tools and building tools that allow them to analyze their data. So this is one of the things that I find most exciting, is the democratization of all of this.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat. And I think one question I would have for the academics we have here is, do you build this into an undergraduate course? Is that where we should be starting?
I think it's way before that.
Okay.
I mean, no, I mean, these models are part of how people are going to be working. So, it changes the way you will think about the subject and what you'll develop with it. And I think it is part of an educational journey that starts a very long time back, partly because if you do that from quite early on, people are better understanding the limitations and what they can do and what they can't do, because they naturally pick them up and, break them in appropriate ways in environments which are safe to break them in. So I actually believe that. I also think fundamentally, if you don't think that most undergraduates are using these large language models just to do all of their coursework, you are sadly mistaken, because they would be stupid not to. Yep. That's the thing. It's like we discussing today about, should people be using these for writing grants? Well, yeah, because you'd be an idiot not to be. But then if you come to, should you be using them to help you solve problems in chemistry, the same answer comes through, which is yes. But that is a process of the human working out how to do it. So as Nathan was saying, you've got that backwards and forwards to be able to answer questions you couldn't do before. Yeah. But you've also got to know their limitations, even when you're playing that game with them, using them to just go and run programs, collect data. So I start from the educate as early as possible, let people get their hands on them as soon as possible, even though they'll do everything wrong, because it is only by doing that they'll start to do it right. The bigger problem I think we have is in the workforce of today, where you have bench chemists who want to be able to use them and are starting to use them to build things, but are less, either more afraid because they feel they don't know enough, which is, I always say, run with it, or they are perhaps too gung-ho because they haven't got anyone explaining to them that these things like to please you. I should point that out. It's a funny way of phrasing it, but it is factual that you have to understand. You have to tell them to be critical of you, otherwise they constantly please you if you use them as an agent for building or answering a question, which I find quite entertaining. But it does have a big impact on what they do for you scientifically if you're just using the large language models and the agents from them in that naive way. Sorry, jumped all over you there, Chris.
Don't worry. No, I think if people are going to be using them in the future, then we have to be teaching. I think the challenge is you actually still want them to have the domain knowledge as well, and making sure they have both is going to be hard work.
How does the panel feel around if there's a potential for a knowledge gap emerging where, so we all learned to program when we had to learn how to program. Now, do you need to learn how to program? Or you at least need to understand what has been vibe coded for you? And I think this is where we're going to run into some challenges with a lot of different recent events that we have the skills, and then we're going to get this gap in the workforce where everyone's relying on the AI, maybe not trusting and verifying to the extent we should be. So, I mean, Chris and I have worked a long time in trying to get Python courses into undergrad courses, undergrad degree programs. Is that necessary anymore? It's an open question. I have views.
It can start from it's a bit like, do I really need to be able to do maths? Because actually all the maths I need to be able to do, I can just get my computer. And that's been true for a really long time. Calculator followed by computer, it can do it for me. But yes, I do still need to be able to do maths because I need to be able to look at those numbers and go, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Now, do I need to be able to formally write maths as much as I used to be necessary? No, because I've got someone who's really good at writing formal maths for me now, which is cool. Yeah. So I feel quite strongly that you're going to have to understand this stuff, because until the world changes a really long time, I'm going to use this example. I've used it lots recently. So I'm going to suspect all of us on this call have had this happen to us with someone who works for us, right? For me, it's PhD students. They come in and they show me something and I go, that's wrong. And they go, oh, Claude did that. Yep. To which the answer is, no, Claude didn't do that. You're responsible for that because it's you running Claude. So we have to, whatever you're using, you have to be trained in it enough that you are able to spot when the model is not doing what you want it to do, whatever that might be, whatever discipline it is within. Otherwise, the errors that they have, and maybe I'm a slight naysayer here, I never believe any of these things are actually going to be 100% accurate, because that's not how this works. They're a model of the real world. Therefore, if we don't understand, like, when it looks weird, we are going to get ourselves into big messes quite quickly. But I think it does change exactly what you need to learn how to do and how you need to do it. But fundamental understanding is still absolutely key in my brain.
Yeah, I agree.
But about this coding question, coming back to also with maths, they're very good points, Charlotte. I fully agree. But with coding, I mean, giving this Python intro courses, they are so much slower than doing this vibe coding. Yeah, but on the other hand, I see danger, yeah, getting a vibe code running, and then you don't understand what is happening. Yeah, but I'm getting more relaxed maybe with getting older and older, because if at the end the results are okay and they can convince me that this code is running also with a data set provided by Pat, yeah, fully prospective data sets, then I'm relieved again. And yeah, so I think it's another tool. Yeah, and also, like, I think in the past it was not Claude who did this, but it was another undergraduate student who did this, and I did not manage him or her. Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing. Yeah, if it's an agent or a human being, yeah, if you're not right in managing or supervising this, then it's your own fault. Yeah, and this is with and without AI. Yeah, but Nathan, we have so many questions and we don't have any more time, I think, right? In the Q&A, I just looked, there are some specifics also to Pat and Charlotte. I just looked into it, and I think we have to disappoint 98% of the questioners, right? Or I don't know what you think, or the audience.
Well, the end of the time we have today. But yeah, it's given a lot of food for thought, and I can see there's not just questions in there, but other people coming back with opinions and viewpoints around this area. So let's open it up to the audience. We already have a number of questions already there, but a reminder, if anybody else wants to add any questions, then please use the Q&A function, and we'll put as many through as we can today. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all the questions today, but you can always follow up with me if you've got any pressing questions. I won't promise that to the rest of the panel. They're doing enough work today. I think I need to take some responsibility myself. So there's one from Paul Clark around relationship between interpretability of AI models and the resistance of the "this is useless" camp. other computational methods have drawbacks, but their drawbacks are understood. Is this a challenge with AI that I think, I mean, was it Chris, I think, alluded to this, that we don't know what it's doing with the data. It's difficult to interrogate. So we're getting plausible, and we all touched on this, we're getting plausible but specious results coming out that they're, I guess, yeah, to Charlotte's point, they're the ones that slip by that you don't realize they're unfeasible because they fulfill our criteria in the molecular beauty or whatever you like to call it. They look good, but they're inherently unreliable. How do people think about that? And I guess it's the old problem of interpretability versus predictivity. You get very interpretable models and they tend not to be very predictive. This has hopefully changed a lot, but what do the panel think?
But I don't think we really have interpretable models right now. The vast majority of what we have isn't interpretable, and we'd all love to have them. Because I don't want to go to a drug discovery team and say, give me every molecule you can think of, and I'll tell you which ones are good, right? That to me is an unsatisfying approach. I'd love to be able to come to a team and say, yes, this part of the molecule is critical. This you want to change. This is what's important. But I think there's still it's an open question for the field, and there's a lot of work to do. And to be honest, I would much rather have smart kids out there working on interpretable models rather than coming up with yet another diffusion model.
Yeah. Any other comments on this before we move on?
I guess one of my concerns about interpretable models is that are we likely to accept its interpretation if it agrees with what we think is the answer?
Yeah, I agree. Model interpretability is very difficult to benchmark.
Yeah.
So it's the cognitive biases coming in again.
Yeah.
I've often
also more, what is the threshold of prediction accuracy, or is it, I don't know, AUC, is it F1, MCC, Cohen's kappa, where to start with interpretability and to stop further improving prediction quality? Yeah? And I would always first go prediction first or quality first, and then, even though I'm also a big fan of interpretability, but it's I don't know when to start or when to stop further improving the model and then working on the interpretability. And of course, it is not consecutive order, but at least not starting first with interpretability to please human beings. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also step slightly. I think interpretability is us wanting to impose a human understanding on what's going on. And I think it was Pat who said it is completely correct. That leads us to a weird place about how you benchmark that and whether you know it's right. It's right because it agrees with me is a really stupid sentence, because we're clearly not right, because I can't write down the correct drug you should make. So my interpretation is wrong. And any med chemist who tells you they can is also lying, or they'd be an awful lot richer than they currently are, because if we could actually do this, we'd be doing it, kind of thing. Whereas, so I do think interpretability helps. It helps us cognitively to understand, but I'm more on the side of thinking about having statistical underpinnings for these models. I'd love it if we had statistical underpinning for the models. I think it would. That changes the game, because then you can say, numerically speaking, that is probably a wrong answer. Yep. And that really helps you with everything going forward. So I kind of lean in that direction. I want people to be thinking about that as a way to really change the way the field looks. And there are people doing it. It's hard, though, because the way the model is constructed.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I've got a question from Peter Kenny. Users of ML models are likely to be much more interested in how accurately the models predict for chemical structures of interest to the user, and rather less interested in how well the models fit the training data. How would you respond to the question, will it work for my structural series?
I think this is another open question for the field, which is domain of applicability. And given a particular training set and a set of molecules that I want to predict on, how well can I make the prediction? And I think one of the nice things is, with the data sets that we're generating at OpenADMET, we're trying to get to that. And I think that the data sets that are being generated at OpenBind, again, because they're somewhat congeneric in nature, can allow us to start to ask these questions. So one of the things that I want is, for these data sets to get out there in the community and for people to start asking those questions and positing new ways of looking at model applicability. I mean, we need to do better than just Tanimoto similarity to the training set.
And what even does tandem-motor similarity mean?
I'm just
Okay,
going to
so-
agree violently with Pat on this one, and it's also one of the reasons why I think the open data is so important, because it's you need lots of people to think about this problem and see it from different sides and shapes. It is not trivial to work out what it means to be similar. It always sounds like a really easy question, and it's actually incredibly hard, because every time you look, you can find a different dimension that allows data leakage or something to happen that you weren't expecting. And understanding what data you need in order to be good is a big deal here.
And maybe also along what Pat was also challenging or saying that, and I would then back to Peter's questions, or then I would demand also, give me some of your compounds that we can measure them beforehand, yeah? Or because this is, I mean, it's not a one-way direction, right? And I personally do not like this. Does it work on my series? Yeah, and I'm not allowed to share this data because it's highly proprietary compounds. Of course, IP makes sense in a pharma context, but in our context here in this, if we want to learn more or to improve the field, then we also need some of the compounds. Yeah? And then it would play the game. Yeah, then let's make it a community effort and test some of these compounds prospectively or make this data blind. Yeah. And of not forgetting about prospective, or no, sorry, it's what Pat was saying, that domain availability. Yeah, we need a measure for this. Yeah, and then we even have not covered Tanimoto and what is a good or a bad chemical representation. Yeah, what do we cover with fingerprints, with 3D, with quantum mechanics descriptors? Is it or is it not it, or do we just need a graph? Is a molecular graph? Maybe. Yeah. If it works, well, maybe not. Yeah.
So we're running almost to time, or we're at time.
Yes.
I think there's just one question, which is quite a nice one, maybe to finish on, and it's a bit existential for this audience and for this panel. Do we need CAD scientists anymore? If we've got all these advances, are we actually needed? And as part of that, a corollary I'd add is, what should people today who are in undergraduate and postgrad, PhD, but lifelong learning, what should we be looking to develop our skills in? What matters in the next few years?
My short answer is sort of not a bad joke. Yeah, we need still CAD scientists, because I really would like to avoid that. Not Claude was saying this, but my CAD scientist was saying this. Yeah, so that we help any non-AI expert to understand what the prediction was trying to aim at. Yeah, because this is.
I'd say that everybody involved in drug discovery ought to be a CAD scientist.
When you ask that question, so I would answer the other part of it about what people should be trained in. What you're training people in actually is, don't say that we know what disciplines they're going to need. Don't pretend we understand what people are going to have to do for science 10 years in the future. What you're training people to do is to be good at being critical thinkers, being flexible, being able to build ideas themselves. Because I definitely didn't do a PhD in AI. I've had to learn an awful lot about it over the course of my career, and I suspect that's true for all of us on here. And that is not about what I learned as a subject, that's about my ability, I hope, to be a critical thinker, to be flexible, and to have a background that allows me to do that. So when you ask what to be trained in, I don't really care what your discipline is. I care that you're ready to do those things, because the future is going to look different from now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the future belongs to the people who know which questions to ask and whether the answers make any sense.
That's a lovely sentiment to end on. I think that's very optimistic and positive for the future. We're not done yet. We still have some life. So, yep, thanks again to the panel for it was a very candid, very practical discussion, and thanks to those who sent in questions. I'm afraid we didn't have much time to cover all of them, but I think I got the gist of the kinds of questions that were there. So as I mentioned at the start, we've recorded today's session, and pending panelist approval, we can distribute that on the website on demand on Optibrium, and we'll probably post something on LinkedIn once it's gone live. So thanks again to Charlotte, Pat, Chris, and Paul. Do stay in touch. I'll be seeing a few of you very soon, at a conference or rather. And I hope to see some of the audience at future sessions. We plan to run this kind of thing relatively often, and some other kinds of sessions. So take care, everyone. Thanks again to the panelists, and bye for now. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.